To order for the Planning Commission, April 27th, 2015. So we will start with an invocation, and for those that care to participate, we'll do that. So, Chris.
Father, thank you for being here with us this evening. We ask for wisdom in each and every decision, and we ask that you would guide and direct our steps. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. And we'll stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all for being here this evening. First item on the agenda is citizen input on non-agenda items. No, there's none of that. Okay. So we have the minutes from the last meeting. Has everybody had a chance to review that?
Those were not included because we had a technical difficulty at the last meeting, so we just got the minutes in order to try to prepare them just real recently, so they're not ready.
Okay, so we'll pass over that and we'll just review them at the next meeting. Any new business, Brian?
None.
No new business. So we'll move right on to the public hearing. Bear with me for a second. So there it is right here. Okay, so the matter presently before the hearing board requires a public hearing. All interested persons in attendance shall be heard on the matter. If you wish to testify on this matter, please be prepared to step forward to the microphone at the appropriate time, state your name, mailing address, and interest in the matter. For those other than the applicants that are interested in testifying as either proponents or opponents, please sign in on the sheet or speak up when we call for testimony. For longer presentations, proponents and opponents may buy time from one another. In so doing, those either in favor or opposed may allocate their time to a spokesperson who will represent the entire group. You may be limited by time for your presentation. Generally, the applicant will have a total of 15 minutes to speak. The proponents will have 5 minutes each. The opponents will be given 5 minutes each. And those thought to be neutral on the matter will be given 5 minutes each. The applicant will then have 10 minutes for rebuttal. All questions must be directed through the chair. Any evidence to be considered must be submitted to the hearing body for public access and to become a part of the record. All written testimony received both for and against prior to the hearing shall be summarized by the staff and presented briefly to the hearing body during staff report. Testimony and evidence must be directed toward the applicable review criteria contained as indicated in the staff report, the comprehensive plan, or the applicable land use regulations which the person believes to apply to the decision. Failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the decision maker and the parties an opportunity to respond to the issue may preclude appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals based on that issue. Failure of the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues relating to proposed conditions of approval with sufficient specificity to allow the local government to respond to the issue may preclude an action for damages in circuit court. Everyone present is encouraged to testify, even if it is only to concur with the previous testimony. At this time, I would ask that any member of the hearing body who has a conflict of interest to please indicate the nature and extent of the conflict and whether you intend to participate in or abstain from the hearing, hearing the present matter. Yes, okay. Ex parte contact. Also, if any member of the hearing body has had any ex parte contact with anyone prior to this hearing, including a visit to the site, please declare the nature and extent of such contact at this time. Nope. Okay. Does any member of the audience have any questions for any commissioner regarding conflict of interest or ex parte conflict? Seeing none, I guess we'll pass on that. Public hearing format. The public hearing will be conducted as follows. Staff report, questions if any by the hearing body of the staff, and then open public hearing for testimony. The applicant, not more than 15 minutes. Proponents, not more than 5 minutes each. Opponents, not more than 5 minutes each. Neutral, not more than 5 minutes each. And rebuttal by applicant, not more than 10 minutes. And then we will close public testimony, and then there will be questions, if any, by the hearing body, discussion and deliberation by the hearing body. No additional testimony will be allowed, and a decision shall be made by the hearing body at the close of the hearing, or the matter will be continued to a date certain in the future. This will be the only notice of that date you will receive. Does anyone have any questions about the procedure outlined for this hearing? Okay, seeing none, we'll move right along. Brian?
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, Commissioners. This is a conditional use application, and the uses that are identified in the zone district, which is the low-density residential, calls for the conditional use permit for the accessory dwelling that is planned on this project on the second story of a new garage as well. And so if they were just building the garage, that would not be coming before you to do that part of it. It's the accessory dwelling that's planned that requires the conditional use permit. The applicants, the Wigans, are in the audience, and they had some help in designing their new structure that they're proposing, and they worked really hard with their designer. He was in to see us several times to make sure that they were complying with the conditions that are in the code that apply to accessory dwelling units. One of those conditions is to make sure that the accessory dwelling unit doesn't exceed the 800 square feet. They're planning that over on top of the garage unit, and it's going to be near that amount but under the maximum amount. They also worked very hard to make sure that the height of the unit would not exceed the 22-foot maximum height for an accessory dwelling unit. However, I might point out that we would like you to consider finding exceptions to the other standard, which staff didn't notice until looking into the details of the submitted application, that the height, although it's meeting as below the maximum permitted height, it actually is slightly over 2 feet taller than the existing home on the tract. And there's actually a standard that says it should not exceed the height of the principal structure that's on the property. So I think because of that, you need to evaluate the suitability of an exception for this particular request and make some findings related to that should you approve this request tonight. The other thing that they did in a voluntary basis, we have quite a few structures. They're usually garage units that are built along alleys, especially in the downtown area. And we currently don't have any ordinance requirement, but we encourage everyone to set their structure back 4 additional feet from the edge of the 20-foot wide alley. And if you think of it in a very practical manner, when you're driving through a commercial parking lot that's double loaded, that driving aisle is 24 feet wide. And that's an ordinance standard, and that's to allow when a car's backing up that's 90 degrees, they have adequate room to back out without hitting the cars behind them and to get going. And so the same thing applies in an alley. We had discovered over time that, and there was a written comment that was included with your packet about concern that we don't have any problem with this as long as they don't back up over into our yard. Well, in order to assure that they won't do that, they really need the 24 feet, and they've set their garage structure 4 feet back from the alley in order to provide that extra backing out space so they don't have to worry about either hitting a fence or crossing over into the neighbor's property when they back out. The particular lot that they're putting this, and I might apologize, our nice new projector for those at home is not working. It won't communicate with us today, so we're going to have to go back to the drawing board and find that out. And our backup system, we've misplaced the cord that we needed, so that didn't work either. Even though we planned for a backup system, that didn't work either.
Spring cleaning in action.
Yeah. And so what you would be able to see or visualize is this is a very large lot. It's 17,250 square feet, which is a very large lot in the single-family zoned area. And so from that standpoint, it really helps in trying to add another accessory project on the property, and allows them to keep it a long distance from what otherwise would be considered their rear yard and interior boundary that's next to another home. Nor I mentioned the additional setback from the alley that they've provided voluntarily. And then along the consideration of the exception on the height not to exceed the existing home, I think the size of the lot can enter into a possible finding there as well. And one of the issues that the applicant indicated in their narrative is that the existing home is definitely a historic home. And that went into their thinking on the suitability of just an addition to the home. Rather than this separate structure. They wouldn't have needed to go 2 stories if they were just making an addition to the home. But as you can imagine, that's not the ideal thing to do to a historic home. Additions are frowned upon to retain that historic character. Even at that, with their proposal as a separate structure, they're proposing it to match the exterior character of that existing home with the same materials. I think he called it marble crete. It kind of looks like a stucco of some sort to me, but he called it marble crete. And so from that standpoint, this structure should blend in pretty darn well with what's on the site. They had a steeper roof to begin with, but they changed that design in order to comply with the 22-foot maximum height. They could probably lower that roof some more and then actually comply with the height requirement, but at that point, they'd be getting pretty close to a flat roof, and I'm not sure that that would be compatible with the neighborhood if they were to do that. I think that might be another reasoning that you might want to find, that just slightly taller than that existing home. The existing home has a very steep pitched roof to it. This home's going to have less so because of that redesign to make sure they weren't exceeding the accessory or the principal building or the accessory building height standard. We do check to make sure it's compatible with the comprehensive plan. And a couple of the things that I think we noticed in the staff report, I guess I mentioned the one about the large lot. I think that really helps guarantee that it's really not an incompatible use with the surrounding properties. Most of the surrounding properties are residential in nature, and accessory garage units are allowed. And with the conditional use permit, you can grant an accessory dwelling unit as well. I don't know if you're aware, but if they were to attach an accessory dwelling unit directly to the home, it's a by right use. it doesn't require a conditional use. So those people that designed our code felt that when you detach it, it might have a slight bit more concern and wanted notification and the holding of a public hearing when they're detached than when they're attached. In an ideal situation, to meet some of the goals within the comprehensive plan, we might actually make both outright permitted uses in order to encourage accessory dwelling units in the low-density district, because that is one of our major tools in order to better utilize existing land and efficiency of land in the city to help curb urban sprawl and having to spread out on the outside of town, because the more accessory dwelling units we can accommodate without terribly impacting the neighbors with increased parking and those kind of things, then we're saving, new annexations and spreading out on farmland. And so that's one of the goals in the comprehensive plan. At the time that was placed in the code, I think the citizenry at that time felt that they were a little bit hesitant to allow these units in the single-family zone, and that was a compromise position, to allow one outright, but the detached not outright. I did mention parking, and obviously they've satisfied one additional parking space by building a garage underneath. They can park a car right in there, and so I think that handles that pretty well. That takes care of most of the issues that came up with this. The other one that comes up several times in criteria, both in the comprehensive plan and the development code, is to make sure that it's not having an adverse impact on the provision of utility services, overburdening the provision of those services. And all of the utility providers have responded back that they have no problem in serving this unit. It's not going to overburden the services. They're all there. There's a sewer line in the alley, a water line along Holly Street. Electric is in the alley. And they actually have more than one choice in how they end up doing the lateral systems. They didn't specifically say which they were going to do in the narrative that was submitted, but they can connect separate laterals to the new dwelling unit, or they can come from the existing house. We did have another written letter from a citizen somewhat concerned if this was to ever become a separate rental unit. They understand that really its intent right now and for the foreseeable future is to be house family members. And so they're not really proposing to rent it. However, these typically do run with the land, and they last forever unless you put a very specific condition that it expires at some, definitive time in the future, and also would allow the potential of this property to change hands, be sold at some point, and the future owners could use it as a rental unit, unless for some consideration you wanted to place a condition that would prohibit that. We haven't, I think I only remember doing one other of these, and that was recently with this board.
On Birch Street, wasn't it?
Yeah. So we haven't had very many accessory dwelling units. I know there have been some 15-some years ago, but I wasn't here at the time those were done. Haven't really done a study to see if any conditions of approval were placed upon any of those. I would caution you to just think about that very careful in doing that, because it does definitely hamstring a property down the road. And so first decide whether an accessory dwelling unit is suitable or not, and if it is, then maybe you don't really need a condition. But they did voice that concern, wanted to make sure I pointed that out to you. I think the other written citizen inputs that we had that are in your packet had no problems or concern with this particular proposal. So I think I'll just, and staff has recommended approval of this, and we did recommend 3 conditions. One, that the applicant is responsible for all of the individual utility lateral service costs, and they also need to have that defined how they're doing it and make sure the public works staff is okay with that before we issue a building permit. And then number 2 is to make sure that the accessory dwelling unit has a separate address. And not only a separate address, but the fire department has requested that it be visible from the street that it's being addressed from, which will be Holly. And the typical way that we've done that, and we did for the other one, is we actually gave it the same address with a or B attachment to it, kind of recognizing with that it's on the same property. We could give it an entirely different address, but we felt like that worked and kind of had that tie to being on the same property. But it was a unique address, and so it can get its own separate mail at that address, which again is related to the fact that unless you put a condition, it will and has the potential to become a rentable dwelling unit on the property. The third, what was the third item? Address, utilities.
The height.
The height. Just your findings about the height exception, recognizing it does not comply with the actual code standard, and see if you can place some findings that, if you feel like that's appropriate.
Okay. That it?
Yeah.
Do we have any questions for Brian right now?
I think so.
Okay. So I'm going to assume that you're the applicant. Would you like to step forward and say anything, or just gonna?
Do I have to be on TV?
You know, start stage and screen.
Okay. My name's Lee, and I am your applicant person. This is Kim, my wife of 346 days, 6 hours, and a few minutes.
Congratulations.
And thank you. And my daughter, Jenny. Can you say hi? Yes.
Hi.
And Jenny is part of our family, will be probably until forever. And so part of our plan is to build, and as he mentioned before, our house was built in 1926. It's made of terracotta, if you know what that is. And if you start tearing into that to add on to our building, it wouldn't go well. And so the idea of adding to it is impossible. I have lived there since 1958 when my parents bought it. They bought it from R.C. Schmidt, who built it in 1926, who owned the furniture store at the Graham Building. And as I grew up there, I decided once it became available, I would buy it. My daughter's already told me that when it becomes available, she will buy it from me, and we'll continue to pass it on down. It is the 5th most historic home in Canby. They were all evaluated a number of years ago, and so as he mentioned, the goal of trying to destroy that historic structure the way it is and add to it just doesn't seem possible. When I married Kim 346 days ago, she has a family in Wilsonville and a house there. And so we were planning to sell it and move some of her children this direction. And we have, the timing is right now to do this, which we plan to do for a number of years. But the timing is good to do this now. And so we're learning about this process. And I really actually tried to read some of the city codes, and I'm really glad you do that and I don't have to.
You're welcome.
It's a very complicated process. And it's been good working with Brian. He's been very helpful through this process, and him and Ron have worked together to try to give us the particulars on what we need to do to make this happen. And so we're here, and that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You betcha.
Any questions of the applicant? I do. There were 3 conditions that you're aware of. Did you have any questions about that or any problems with any of the conditions?
The height, we would like it to be the height that it is. That would be wonderful. The address, we're good with that. To put a condition on it for usage 10, 20, 30 years from now would be a little bit complicated. And so, yeah, so those are my comments.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You bet.
As I see no rebuttal witnesses out there, so I will ask for opponents, but seeing none.
She had a comment.
Oh,
What was the meter?
Well, you asked about the
Sorry.
utilities, and I think for the most part, we were planning on tying it
Having
in
it all
with the
be
existing house. and
tied
not making
together.
it separate.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. So I was supposed to
So-
mention that, too.
Okay.
It's my wife.
Okay, so that there are no opponents, no neutral parties, therefore no need for rebuttal. So I will close public testimony. Any further questions before we?
I was just wondering if Gary Stockwell, if you had run that by him, the power fellow, about connecting to the existing house, if he
Yes,
was...
we talked to the power people, and he was the one that suggested 2 or 3 options. And I think the best option is power is above ground now, and he says if we do any retrofitting, he wants to take everything underground. So we would take it underground and run it to the auxiliary dwelling unit, and then from the auxiliary dwelling unit to the existing property. And that would all be done underground. And so that was his recommendation. He said there's 2 or 3 ways we could do it, and he said he would let us choose, but that would be the simplest. Just go underground to the auxiliary, and then from there to the existing property.
So you'd be changing to the house now, too?
We'd be putting the meter on the auxiliary dwelling unit, but they would all still be on the same meter. And the same thing with the water. They said we could put in another meter, and he said there's no need. So we'll tie in after the existing meter and run the water to it from the road on Holly Street. The question came up about that other thing, gas. And it was suggested that we pipe gas to it. Right now, it's existing on Holly Street. We didn't want to continue it down Holly Street and down the alley to the property, and so we just discontinued the idea of bringing any gas to the property. We currently have oil heat in the existing at this point in time, and it used to be coal, and then it used to be sawdust, and then it used to be, yeah. It's been around.
Okay. Any further questions? Okay. Thank you very much.
You bet.
Okay, so we'll have any discussions, deliberations before we move on to a decision?
I think the only thing we really need to address is the height, like Brian was saying. How do we address that? Do we want to make some kind of finding on that going forward? Or it's more of a question for me. I'm okay with it. I don't really see a major problem with it, but from what... Do we need to do something with that, Brian? Is there something specific we need to...
Since there is a specific requirement in the code that says the height of an accessory dwelling unit shall not exceed the height of the principal structure on the property. In this case, we're only talking about 2+ feet, so there's not a big difference. Generally speaking, I think the intent was probably if you have a 1-story home, then 2-story accessory structures are probably not what they want. With the idea, if you think of it, is you've got this single-family home, it's been there for all these years, you've got your surrounding neighbors, and then you plop something taller and bigger in the backyard than what they've always had. Well, this isn't really doing that because the house has such a large pitch and stuff, and so staff felt like that with a couple of the suggested findings that you could provide an exception with this, and we can handle it that way. I'm not sure that I disagree with the standard that's in the code. I think it's probably a good standard to have, so I think it's suitable for you to specifically address it with this case and provide some findings as to why you think it's suitable in this unique case.
Okay.
I think given the nature of the house, the historical nature of it, the pitch of the roof, as you said, it would give, if they do cut it back to 2 feet to give it more of a flat roof, would really go against the architecture, the blend of everything. So I think it makes sense to grant it.
Okay.
He had a comment.
Can I still talk?
Well, since we're so crowded here and we're 31 minutes into our meeting, I don't want to run over, but okay. I have that power apparently. I didn't know that I did, but now I do.
Ron came out and measured the existing structure from the ground. I'm not sure how he did that, but he says he's really talented. But above the roof of the existing structure are 2 chimneys, both of which are in excess of 2 feet above the existing roof. And that helps you in the thinking processes. And so actually, if you want to measure the top, does the top of the ceiling, does that count? If we did that, we might be okay, but I'm just mentioning that. So.
Okay. Well, I have no problem with the height myself, and I also don't have a problem that, you know, 20 or 30 years down the road that it would become a rental. That is not, that's not, not something that I think bothers me in the least. So at this point, I'll entertain a motion to approve this with the exception for the height.
Second.
I don't.
Oh,
I can't make the motion. You can. Okay.
Yeah, I'll let someone else actually speak the words, and I'll second it.
Sean?
Do we want to address the Todd Gary's concern about the private address? Do we need to specifically note that it's separate?
Actually, I
be
think it's in
visible?
there. It's in the.
It's in there.
It's already in here.
Oh, okay,
In the-
good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay,
I'm
so
just not sure what we want to address the actual height issue. I'm not sure what we want to put in there about that. Just noting that it is. Is that what we're saying, Brian?
Yeah, I'd say you make a motion, something to the effect of approve this subject to staff's recommendation and with the findings that those 3 things you just mentioned, the pitch of the roof helps it appear that it's not, you know, a higher height than the principal house. A flat roof would not be a desirable thing for compatibility.
Yeah.
And the existing chimney determined to be higher than the roof and may actually match the height of the accessory dwelling. And I could add those to the findings
we'll do that.
for your signature.
Okay. So, does that help you out
I think it
in
does.
crafting the motion?
So, I would move that we approve. What's the number on it? 15-01, as stated by staff, with the findings that we are not in favor of having a flat roof on the accessory dwelling, and that we don't see an issue with the roof difference in height, and that the chimney is as tall as the building will be.
Have a second?
Second.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded that we approve CUP 15-01 for conditional use permit for Mr. Wigan at 613 North Holly Street. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? There you go. It's passed.
Can we clap?
You can. Thank you very much. Items of interest from staff. Hey, there's nothing I can do to help you with a new cord.
We're going to have to go back to the drawing board and try to figure out. We've had more than one instance of not having this thing communicate properly with us. We're not quite sure why. It works sometimes and not other times. It's a fancy little machine, though. It's tiny. We had 2 meetings today on the North Redwood concept plan project that we're working on in North Redwood, and they went very well, and it was our first opportunity for the consulting team to present 2 major options in the design for that 66 acres, and they presented it to a steering committee as well. I wasn't at that meeting, but I heard that it went fairly well, and the majority of the participants and the property owners that are involved in such seem to be gravitating towards an option 2 that was shown. And it ends up showing a connection to Teakwood in, what's it called? Willow Creek, I forget the name. Willow Estates.
Yeah, Willow Creek Estates.
There'd be a connection to some undeveloped land that is east of Willow Creek. And that could amount to anywhere from 10 to 15 possible future lots. And it would end up in a cul-de-sac and near the railroad track down by the highway. And the thought would be that there could be an emergency means of access to the highway for fire protection, because that's a very, very important, and has been indicated all throughout this, that subdivision only is, a large subdivision only has one means in and out, and really is an illegal type situation, and that they really need another means, and they think that this emergency access would be a good compromise type position to get that emergency access, provide access to some undeveloped land, and yet not funnel a ton of traffic through that existing development from the rest of the 66 acres. So staff is kind of ecstatic that it seems like we're kind of moving that direction. There certainly could be concern on the parts of Willow Creek Estate homeowners, because there will be some additional traffic that might go through there.
When do you anticipate that we'll be seeing this?
So there will be more meetings in the late June timeframe. So I would imagine somewhere around then is probably when something's going to be coming. There'll be some sort of additional hearing. Either you'll be invited to, or we'll specifically hold it here. I didn't actually check that to see what was planned on the schedule, but
I attended today, Brian, and Matilda was saying that there's going to be a combination. There's 2 different committees that are 2 different groups that are seeing this right now, and so they're going to put them together in June. But I don't know that this group will see it yet at that point, even. But I was very impressed with where we've gotten to.
yeah.
It's going to be quite the development, and just getting everybody in line and making sure we're all going the same way.
Yeah.
But it could be really, really great.
I spoke with a gentleman that farms a large quantity of land up towards the Willamette River, and he has looked at that 66 acres, and it's very rocky. It's not suitable for farming, so it would make a very good housing area, so we're not eating up unnecessary farmland.
Okay.
That's really all I had to report, I guess.
Do we have any items of interest coming from our group? I will then entertain a motion to adjourn.
Mr. Chair, I make a motion that we adjourn this meeting, completed all our business.
Yeah. Do you have a second?
Third second.
Moved and seconded that we adjourn? We're adjourned. Thank you very much.